Hi, I'm Summer.
And I'm Mike.
And we got married.
With children.
We're going on 2 years of marriage.
But we've been together for 10.
He brought 2.
She brought 2.
Together, that's 4 kids.
That's way too many kids.
And we want to share what works for us.
And what doesn't.
For step-parents, co-parents, marriage, being your best self, managing work, family, friends, health. We're going to talk about
everything.
You ready, babe?
Always.
Hello, Everything Always family. Today, it is just me again, and I am interviewing Toby Hazlewood, who is a father, he's a husband, he's a stepfather, he's a writer, and he is an entrepreneur. He's the founder of the Divorced Lifestyle Design online community, and he is from England, so you're going to really love his accent. But what's so great, and the reason that I wanted to have him on this show is that he has a very unconventional way of co-parenting post-divorce. And I really wanted to share this concept with a lot of listeners because I think it will open your mind to a different way of co-parenting and sharing your children with your ex-partner. And I have only heard of this one time, and it was a long, long time ago, maybe 10 years ago. And I remember being fascinated by it at the time, and I hadn't really heard of anybody doing it since. And then I found Toby. I know that he's written a ton of books. We will have links to all of that and direct you on all the areas to go to find Toby and information about him. Of course, it's also on the PDF that we created for this podcast because there's so much great stuff. So if you are, I think this episode really applies to you if you are even thinking about a divorce. I know that we have some listeners that have been listening to the show and who have written in because they are curious about, well, what happens if I go through with this? They're either separated or thinking of getting a divorce, but they have children involved. And so it's something that they're very reluctant to do because they don't want to cause that type of stress in their children's lives, totally understandably. And I think it will be really interesting for those listeners to hear today's episode. Also, for those of you who may have been in a co-parenting relationship for years or who are just starting that after divorce. There's so many really intriguing topics today. Oh my gosh. Okay, so let me just tell you a little bit more about Toby before we dive in. He's co-parented his 2 daughters from the first relationship he had, which was over, 10 years ago, I think it was, maybe even more than that. He's very passionate about co-parenting and raising happy and fulfilled kids in separated families. And since he got divorced, he has now remarried. And I think he's been married, if I remember correctly, you'll hear it in the interview, but I think 4 years married and together for 6 years. And he's got 2 stepchildren from his current wife. And so he knows the blended family deal. He's a family of 6, just like us. And I want to tell you about the other stuff, but I think you should just listen so that you can hear the way that he is raising his children. And it's a very, very child-centric way, which is awesome. But really, the point of this whole episode is to really exemplify that a post-divorce lifestyle can be awesome. And I think so many people, if you're already divorced, newly divorced, it can be very daunting. Like, oh my gosh, how am I going to create this whole life? So he actually has a book all about that like breaks it up into chunks of what are the things that you can do right after divorce to design an awesome life. So we're going to talk about those tools, tactics, mindset hacks, and everything having to do with divorce, separating, and how to co-parent and how to have a happy life. So it's a really good interview. I'm really excited. So let's just get into it. Stop talking, Summer. I know that I talk a lot. I'm sorry. Let's go. Here we go. Toby, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Summer. Thanks for having me along.
Well, this is going to be super cool. There's actually a lot that we have in common. We are parents in a blended family. We are a bio parent, a step parent, and I learned that you are very much into personal development, and you're an entrepreneur. So we have all these things in common. This is going to be great.
Fantastic. That sounds great.
We both got married young, both got divorced before turning 30. I mean, there's a long list. There's one big thing that we're going to dive into in a minute that we don't have in common that I think is going to be extremely fascinating for our listeners. So I will get into that in just a minute. But first, I just wanted to learn and have our listeners learn a little bit more about you and how this became so important for you. There's so many blended families and people that have gotten divorced with children involved, gotten remarried, then gained new children. But what was it that inspired you to write about it? Because you've got several books out. You've got very with really cool topics, by the way. And you've created this community about co-parenting and life after divorce. And I'm just curious as to what your journey was, and especially being a man, because I have to say there's so many women that will talk about this. And I get ultra excited when there's a man who really sheds a lot of light and perspective on it.
Okay. Well, that's a lot to cover, but I'll try and come up with something fairly brief. But feel free to stop me if I'm going off at a tangent. So I guess the kind of short history of my life in terms of divorce and everything was that as you say, I kind of got together with my now ex-wife fairly young. We had our first child together when I was just 23, just about to turn 24. We kind of had a fairly, I guess, fast-moving relationship in the sense that we got married fairly soon after having our first daughter. We bought a house, we sold a house, we moved to a bigger house, then we had a second daughter. And we kind of just realized after about 5 years together that it really wasn't working. It wasn't that there was any catastrophic event. We were just probably trying to fill our lives with events to distract from the fact that we'd got together too young. It wasn't really going to last the distance. But that said, as I say, there wasn't a catastrophic event, and we were determined that we'd brought these two young girls into the world, and we both wanted to be actively involved in their upbringing. So we had a kind of, I suppose, for about 18 months after we parted, there was a more conventional split of responsibility. You know, the girls were at that stage around 3 and 6, or maybe just broaching 4 and 7, and they needed to be with their mum more than with me. But you know, I made sure that I wasn't going to become a stranger to them. So I saw them virtually every weekend. I moved away a little way, but I made sure that I saw them regularly. And after about 18 months, my ex-wife, to her credit, we communicated. We'd worked through a lot of the pain and the difficulty and the kind of upset that inevitably comes with divorce. But she suggested that we move to a more sort of equal split of parenting. So around 2007, summer 2007, we eventually put that in place, and we started doing an equal split of 50-50 co-parenting. So we had 2 houses in the same town around the school by this time where the girls were going to school. And it was literally a 50-50 split. So they'd come to me on a Monday after school. They'd stay with me through the following week and weekend. And then on a Monday morning the following week, I'd drop them off at school, and then Mum would collect them. Quite often we'd have a midweek visit sometimes if needs be, if the girls wanted to see us or if it was convenient to the other parent. But, we didn't live in each other's pockets. It was still a kind of separate but together kind of setup. We just recognised that as the best way of kind of both remaining actively involved in the girls' upbringing, whilst also, I think it also afforded us both the space to kind of recover our lives. Both of us had, by this stage, were in the process of building careers. I guess I'd had a bit of a head start, given I'd not had the time off to actually have the kids. She'd obviously been off work while raising the kids as babies. But by this stage, we were both building our new careers, and as the years passed, it became a much more established pattern. And I think what really struck me was that, albeit that it doesn't sound that radical, and I mean, I'm sure plenty of people do that kind of arrangement, it didn't feel that typical in the UK, at least. That we started to see some of the kids' classmates, their parents, a few of those parted, and it just fell into a more traditional setup where the father typically didn't get to see very much of the kids, maybe a midweek visit and the occasional weekend. And people still couldn't really understand quite how we managed to make it work. And I suppose in the course of that time, getting onto the sort of second part of your question, I'd kind of found myself wondering why it was that people were so resistant to kind of treating, the kind of, it almost seemed as though divorce became a kind of a defining end point in their lives, a point at which they were destined thereafter to just have to suffer or to make do or to get by or to kind of build something that was in some way second best. And when I looked at my life and the life that I felt I was giving my kids, and certainly how it expressed itself in their lives in terms of their accomplishments and the fact that they're both well adjusted and done very well at school and all these things, it just struck me that if you really put your mind to it, you can treat it as a kind of a new start. Inevitably people talk about new starts and dusting themselves off, but really I don't see any reason why you can't just use it as an opportunity to kind of really design a life that's both ideal for you and for your kids, and give them something that isn't second best, and give yourself a life that isn't second best,
Right.
And that's kind of gone on to kind of form the ethos of everything that I do. And it's, you've mentioned books that I've written and communities that I've set up, and it's all very much a sort of passion project. I have a day job as well, but it's something that the writing, I've kind of found it as a good way. Initially, it was a cathartic process, to write down my kind of thoughts and my story, and to kind of just try and get down on paper how I felt it had all unfolded. But I've kind of, without wishing to be preachy to people, I want to share the lessons I've learned. And if someone finds it of value, then fantastic, and if not, then, great too. They can go and find their own way, and no hard feelings. But it just seems like a good opportunity. I know as a kid, as a young adult, I kind of rejected a lot of good advice that people offered, particularly, when I was settling down and thinking of having a young family and barely out of university. And I think it's become a bit more of a passion, and something I can see there's a value in listening to people who've potentially been where you are, and then trying to learn the lessons that they've gone through. And it feels very empowering to be able to share that stuff with people if they want to listen. And there does seem to be quite a lot of people who do want to listen, by virtue of the fact that, the books sell, and I get invited to have great conversations like this. So this is the proof of the pudding, I guess.
Well, it's so true. I was so hungry for it. I remember when I was first going through my divorce, because there is this feeling of death, in your life, and something that's coming to an end, and all, these hopes and dreams that you had, and then all of a sudden not getting to see your children every day. I mean, it can be very daunting and feel like so much of the end, and you focus so much on the end of something, rather than, like you said earlier, the opportunity that comes with it. And I think what's so great is you have a playbook, a 90-day playbook on thriving after divorce, which is awesome. I have not read it, but I'd love to hear some of the things, if you can, of what you have in there, because I know that a lot of listeners, we have listeners that are, such a range. There are some that have been, in a blended family for 15 years. There are some that have just started. There are some that are just dating, or who have just gotten divorced. And I think the common thing is that I hear, as somebody who's gone through it, and friends that will come to me, is, how did you get through it? What did you do? They're just in this kind of desperate place. And so I'd love to hear some of the things that you have in the playbook that could apply.
Sure. So that particular book was one that I wrote. I read a number of articles, and one of the main elements of the kind of community that you mentioned that I built up is just a series of curated blog posts, really. And I draw together as much information as I can about so many different aspects of divorce. And let's face it, there are so many, because there's so many different surroundings to the circumstances of people's parting. But one of the things I kept stumbling upon was the idea of time and divorce recovery time, and, the fact that no matter how you may be very enthusiastic to be out of a relationship, or you may be going into a divorce reluctantly, it may have been sprung upon you. But in any instance, I think no matter how you feel about it, you have to respect, and it's also the hardest thing to do, respecting the fact that it does take time for the recovery to happen. It takes time for you to find the ability to forgive and to let go of pain and anger and all the kind of emotions that come along with divorce. And I think the uncertainty over that is something that's very unsettling for people. With any project, whether you're trying to build something or create something, or whether you're trying to raise your kids, or learn a skill, learn a sport, or build fitness, or anything like those kinds of things, there's always an element of time and uncertainty over how long things are going to take. So what I kind of figured out in reflecting on my own life was, if I could kind of think of a period of time that was long enough that it would allow real results to kind of potentially be built, and for momentum to be built in the accomplishment of those results, but short enough also so that it didn't seem so daunting that you couldn't contemplate allowing that period of time to pass, then that would be quite a useful time frame on which to kind of start to then set goals and set plans and try and put something in place and kind of form an idea. So if you're coming out of a relationship and your ultimate goal was that you wanted to set up your new home for you and your kids, or you and your kids when they were visiting with you, then, it may not be possible to get that all in place in the space of 90 days, but you may be able to make a first goal being, I'm going to be able to part my finances from my ex or agree the financial split. So I know how much money I've got to be able to afford that new home. And then I can start to think about what job I need in order to be able to support that lifestyle. And by breaking up that divorce recovery process into sort of 90-day chunks of time, and then using a sort of a regular structured pattern for setting goals, measuring your progress towards achieving them, and then reflecting on them at the end of that 90-day period, and using that reflection to set your goals for the next 90 days, it kind of breaks up the time a little bit more so that you get to feel the progress and you get to feel the momentum building, but also so you're not just kind of waiting to the point at which you eventually just feel better. And so that was the kind of theory.
Wow, I wish I'd had that, because as you're saying that, I love ticking things off the list, and I love it because, that feeling of moving the needle, whether it's, and just feeling productive and knowing that you're that much closer to a better life, a better position, whether it's, in your business or personally, is such an awesome feeling. And that alone creates that momentum and that new energy that really takes you into that new mindset, and getting you out of that kind of depressed or confused or overwhelmed mindset.
And this is it, the whole cliche of, how do you eat an elephant? You do it in chunks. And that's the thing. You can't take on a massive thing like building your new life, or even, recovering or escaping a painful relationship, and then building your confidence and building your inner strength and resolve. That takes time. And it takes, thinking about things at a more granular level and figuring out what you're going to do today and what you're going to do over the next month or two to actually build that. And sometimes we can get overwhelmed, we can get lost in the bigger picture, and really it's just sometimes having some means of anchoring ourselves in the near term and forming that tick list, as you say, so that you can actually start to build that momentum, that you actually realize you've got it in you to recover, and you've got it in you to actually build something positive again.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's confidence is all it takes,
And what's so great as you're saying this is that I think that often people look at the end result and then see how far, well, this is where I want to be. I want to be happily married again, or just happy and moved on. And they have this big picture, which is great that that's what they're working towards. But instead of, when they're not looking at the chunks and they're just looking at it as one big, huge, goal that they have to make, it just becomes so overwhelming and stifling. And the thing is that those small chunks feel so good. Like it's just a continuous good feeling to keep progressing towards that big goal. And I think that sometimes people forget how good those little chunks feel and think it's only going to feel good when they get to the end.
Indeed. And sometimes there isn't an end, it's that you almost rob yourself of the opportunity to enjoy the achievements that you make along the way too. It's not just about getting to the end. It's about realizing one day that the sky is blue and that you do have your self-confidence back, and maybe your mind does open up to dating again or something like that. Those mini achievements along the way, they're so precious and so important that you don't want to strip yourself of the ability to see them. So that's really the goal.
You are remarried and you have 2 more children that have been brought into your family, correct?
That's right, yeah.
So and what are the ages of all the kids?
Okay, so my 2 daughters are 15 and 19. So my 19-year-old has actually left home now. She's at university in the Netherlands. Okay. And then my wife now, my second wife, she has 2 kids from her first marriage. She has a daughter who's 11 and a son who's 13. So we have one boy who's 13 in the kind of almost in the middle. And that's the blended group that we brought together. We've been married now for coming up for 4 years. We've been together for about 6 or 7. I think a story similar to yours and your husband's, if I recall correctly. I listened to one or 2 of your podcasts, and Match.com had a lot to answer for. Yep. And we met, we dated for about, we said to ourselves we were going to date for a year before we met each other's kids. That was after we determined there was a future in it. And I think that served us well in making sure that we were right, that we were ready for each other, and that we were both ready to be in a committed relationship again. And, the rest has kind of followed on.
how is the dynamic with the family and the siblings?
So I guess the pattern has become that my eldest and the youngest, they seem to have a pretty close bond. When they first got to know each other, the youngest, Ruby, she was very, very little, and she appreciated having a sort of big sister to play with the dolls with and do the girl things and do each other's makeup and all that sort of stuff. So that was a real unifying point for them.
Yeah.
And then for the middle two, my youngest daughter and the boy, they've both been united by a love of sport. So they're both keen soccer players, and they both play in teams and do various things, and they seem to rub along pretty well and like playing on the computer games and things together as well. So dynamically wise,
sounds like our kids.
Yeah,
so
I think
similar.
there's always something that they find a way of bonding. But I mean, the great thing for us is that, and I guess maybe we'll come on to this in terms of the overall living arrangement, but we get plenty of time when there's all six of us together, less so now that my daughter's gone off to university, but there's plenty of time when we're all six of us together. Then there's quite a lot of time when it's me and my wife and her two kids, or me and my wife and my two kids, or just me and my two kids and just her and her two. So it's never been such a condensed and concentrated living environment that we don't get time for everyone to get their special time with each other. So I think it does kind of help to maintain a bit of the kind of magic, if you like.
Hey guys, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for taking a chance on us and listening to our podcast. Our goal is for you to not only learn from us, but to learn with us. We've taken a leap on being pretty open about our blended family and how we do life in everything. We want to make sure we bring you all the things you want to hear. Always. So please, if you have specific questions like, how do I get along with my ex? Or how do I get along with his ex? Or how do I set some boundaries in place? Or why doesn't my stepson like me? Please email us with your questions. Email them to info@summerfelix.com because we want to answer those questions, and we aim to bring you the best guests and conversations to address your most burning issues about everything. Always. Earlier, I said we have so many things in common, and then there's one thing we don't, and that is the practice of what's called, I actually didn't know, I have only known one family who has done this, and I didn't even know there was a term for it. And
Me either.
And you'd think I would, because I'm like all about this blended family and all the different co-parenting styles. But it's a post-divorce parenting model, which is known as either bird nest co-parenting or bird nesting. Like I said, I've only known one other family who had done this, and I thought, wow, that is pretty amazing. And I'm going to let you describe what it is and how you came to say this is what we're going to do.
Okay. So, yeah, going back a little bit in time, probably only about 3 or 4 years now. As I described, we were in a situation where myself and my ex-wife each had a separate home in the same town, probably less than a mile apart. We never really saw each other. The girls would transition between us, and that was kind of the way that life went. One thing that was becoming a bit of a dissatisfaction for the girls, albeit that they appreciated that they didn't have to go far. They were at the same school, they were near their friends, and they got to see both their parents. But as you can probably imagine, they were kind of getting to the stage where there was a lot of stuff going back and forth with them. And on every Sunday night, they were being called upon to pack all their clothes that they wanted to take with them, and the chargers for their phones and makeup and gadgets and all the other things that they needed to have with them. And as much as we tried to discourage them from that kind of transient lifestyle, it was a real factor. And it sounds trivial, but it was a factor for them. To be fair, by this stage, both me and my ex-wife had both remarried, so we both had other family homes away from the area. As it happens, we both live about an hour in the opposite direction from Manchester, where our kind of bird nest home is.
Oh, okay.
And where our daughters go to school. So my ex-wife, again, to her credit, she came up with the idea again, and she suggested that we look for a kind of single home, a central home where the girls would basically stay in one place, and we as parents would come and go on alternate weeks as the kind of live-in parent of the week. So that's the fundamental concept. I guess that's the nest, as we describe it. That's the place where it is the girls' home as far as we're concerned. It's an apartment where they each have their own bedroom. The pictures on the walls are pictures of both sides of their families, both sets of grandparents. And it's not decorated in their style particularly, but, it's their home fundamentally.
Right.
And then there's a third bedroom where it's kind of equipped like a I guess you'd say like a motel room or a hotel room. It's got, furniture in there. It's got some wardrobe space where I keep some things there. My ex-wife keeps some things in her side of the wardrobe. It's got its own bathroom. So essentially for each of us, I arrive on a Monday. She's gone on that Monday. I bring my clothes with me for the week. If anything I want with me, I bring groceries for the week. I live in the apartment for the week, catering for the girls and taking them to sports clubs and, going to parenting meetings at school or whatever. And then at the end of that week, on the Sunday night, I clean the apartment, hopefully with the girls' help, if I can persuade them or coerce them into doing so. And then on that Monday morning, the following week, I move out, and then my ex-wife, she moves in. And so, really the burden of moving in and out is upon me and her to kind of come and go rather than the girls coming and going.
Right.
And it's a subtle distinction. Obviously, there are concessions and kind of compromises that need to be made by all parties. That's not just the girls, it's me, my ex-wife, and it's also my wife now and my ex-wife's husband. They're without us for a week. But this is the arrangement.
That's what I was going to ask, if they ever come with you. So, okay, that's so interesting to me. And I totally get it. I'm like, of course in my mind, I go, wow, that's so easy, because I know that we have that with our kids. And it was especially hard when they were younger and it was more frequent transitions back and forth. And we were really just down the street from our, pretty close from our ex-spouses, but they were, it's still a lot of stuff. And it's, there's popping in the middle of the week. Oh no, I need this, I need that. It's a lot going on. And I think, wow, that'd be so easy if it were all just in one spot.
Sure. The thing is, it's not just about that. That sounds like, that's the reason I've cited, and it's certainly an important one. But I mean, there are so many other benefits to it once you kind of live with the arrangement. Financially speaking, both my ex-wife and I were both renting an extra house that we didn't need half the time. Yeah. It was always a sense of kind of, this is becoming more of a stretch than it really needs to be, especially given that both of us had gone on to make our lives in sort of towns outside of Manchester, and therefore we had other homes, which both of us were going off to stay in with our new spouses when we didn't have the girls. So that was a big factor to it. It's also, I think, part again of this message that you kind of send to the world, that you send to the kids, and that you give to yourself, that you're really designing something that's kind of as efficient and effective and positive as it can be. I think what better message could it possibly send to the kids that their parents are both committed to their upbringing and to their comfort than actually saying, okay, we're going to take this step and see how it works. And there's no doubt about it. There have been challenges for everyone involved in kind of making it work and making it sustainable, but we never went into it thinking this is what we're going to have to do now for the rest of our joint lives raising these kids. It was kind of a living experiment to begin with. Right. But, it's something when you can commit to it and see how you can make it work, you sort of see the minor drawbacks against the massive benefits, and it kind of all of a sudden seems to make sense.
How has your ex-wife's husband and your wife, how has it been for them? And was it hard to adjust to that? Or was it just something that was kind of, right at the beginning, this is what I do?
Yeah, so we weren't doing the nesting thing when either of us met our new husband and wife. So at that stage, when we both got remarried, we were doing the sort of equal co-parenting. But there was already that understanding from both of our new spouses that the kids played a big part in our lives. It would have been foolish for us to kind of explain it otherwise. And I remember putting a great deal of thought into my Match.com profile at the time, thinking, how can I describe this without making it sound like I'm kind of hung up on my ex-wife, or that, right. There's all these other challenges. But, as time went on, we both met our ex-partners, new partners, and, got to know them a little bit, and kind of, I think they could understand the ethos behind the whole situation. And presumably they must have kind of appreciated it on some level to want to ultimately get married. So I certainly can only speak for my wife now, but she was actually quite encouraging of the arrangement when my ex-wife proposed it. When she suggested this idea of nesting, my wife now was like, well, I think it's a really good idea. She could see the economic benefits. From her perspective, it still means that I'm only I'm living with her half the time, if you like. It's a bit more than half the time, because at weekends we tend to come over as well from the nest and, see her. But fundamentally, when I move out of the nest on a Monday morning, I come over to my sort of new family home, and I live with my wife and her kids, who have a much more conventional occasional weekend visit with their father.
Right.
So, we've always had that constrained time together, but I think that thing about absence making the heart grow fonder does play a part sometimes. It's good to, be away from someone that you love, to remind yourself of all the reasons you love being with them when you're back with them. And, that certainly plays a part for me when I come back to my wife and see her again after being away for a week. But I think it does take a certain amount of trust, obviously. She kind of, laughingly, I guess, sometimes refers to it as going off to stay with your ex-wife again, but it's obviously not that, But yeah. It's also the thing of, we've been quite clear about how we've tried to draw barriers and boundaries up within the nest. We've been quite careful not to over-personalize it to be my place or to be my ex-wife's place. It's the girl's place first and foremost. And, we've kind of made sure we each have some storage space. And for my part, I don't go there rooting through the cupboards to see what food she's been buying or where she's been shopping or whatever. And I trust that she does the same. We just kind of treat each other with a bit of respect, but also, fundamentally, I don't see her from one month to the next unless there's a real cause to, not out of design, but simply because our paths don't really cross. I leave on a Monday morning and she arrives on a Monday night. So quite often when you describe the situation to people, they're like, well, isn't that really uncomfortable seeing your ex? And I think, well, not really, because I never do see her. We communicate freely over matters concerning the kids, but we don't have any real cause to speak on a regular basis about anything else, and we certainly don't see each other in person. And the other aspect to it is people think, well, isn't it weird sleeping in the bed that your ex-wife slept in? Well, I strip off my bedding when I leave, and she comes and she's got her bedding in a cupboard, and she makes the bed up with her bedding. And to my mind, it's no different than checking into a hotel. You don't know who slept in the bed in the hotel the previous night. It had different bedding on everything, and notionally, it makes no odds to me. So
I'm sure you get a storm of questions.
you do, absolutely, and I think people. I'm pleased to say that it's questions that seem to be prompted out of kind of intrigue and interest rather than skepticism.
Right, absolutely.
Which kind of is sends to me a good message about what people are recognizing. I mean, even when we were doing the equal co-parenting, people were really seemingly full of praise. Once they'd got past the how do you kind of manage, how does it work? People were very complimentary about. I wish my parents had done that if they'd had divorced parents, or I wish my brother-in-law would do that. He's divorcing and he wants to see more of his kids. But there's all those kinds of debates, and it does seem that people kind of. This is kind of why I've become so sort of pseudo-evangelical about it, is because I think people are so lacking in awareness about what is possible if you just kind of try and challenge what's conventional and just think a little bit outside the box. You can put in place these arrangements that are far superior, I think, than what people just settle for. And it's kind of trying to break that pattern of just settling for things, but actually trying to do something positive, because we all only get one life,
Exactly. And you can design it the way you want. Do you find that I guess my question is, with the children, how often are you all together? As I know your eldest is off at university, but how often do all of you get together, and how much time, have they had that experience of living together, or is it infrequent, or how is it like on weekends? Or I'm just curious about all of that.
I couldn't say it conforms to any particular pattern, but I would say, in the last month, we've putting aside the one who's away in a foreign country, but we've probably all been together maybe 6 nights in the last month. What tends to happen is it depends on, as I'm sure as a parent, you understand, like all the sporting commitments and matches and friends who they want to visit and go to parties and sleepovers and all that sort of thing. But, typically what will happen is we'll look at a calendar and say, who's got stuff on this weekend? Can we find a means where either me and my daughter will come across from the nest on a Friday night and spend the weekend in the family home, or sometimes my wife and my 2 stepkids will come across and they'll stay at the nest with us. It's just about big enough that we can all sleep there. And even before my daughter went off to university, that was still the case. It wouldn't be every weekend that we'd spend together, but we'd certainly look to spend as much time together as we could. We've always taken a summer holiday, a summer vacation together. Christmases, we've tended, because of the complications with other parents, we tend to alternate Christmases, and sometimes we've had Christmases when we've got all the kids together, and sometimes we've got none of the kids, and it's a completely different experience. But I think it's just a kind of as and when we can make it work, really. But I doubt more than 2 weeks go by when we haven't all been together at some stage for a night or two. And then in the summer, in school holidays, I'm lucky enough that I work at home. Well, maybe that's not lucky enough, depending on how you look at it. But with school vacations and things like that in the summer and over spring break and things like that, we tend to base ourselves in one home so that we have much more prolonged periods of time together. It kind of varies, but I think that flexibility is what's important. And it's also, again, the golden rule of it all is it in the best interest of the kids? I could drag my 15-year-old daughter over here and just say, no, we're going to the family home this weekend, and you're going to miss out on going to see your friends and going shopping, going to the movies, or whatever you want to do, just so that I can be with my wife. But I know that's not in her best interest. She'll probably be unhappy and feel resentful of me, and it won't be a quality experience. And far better that if she's got something she wants to do, I accommodate that, and then she's more willing to accommodate when I want to come away and do something with my wife and all of us together, or whatever.
Right, exactly. What would you say has been the biggest challenge for you or for anyone involved in this type of arrangement?
Yeah, I mean, so one challenge that I could never have foreseen, and it has been quite a tricky one to overcome for me personally, has been, so if you can imagine, when we were living in two separate homes and the girls used to move back and forth, their mum's set of rules and how she liked to run her household was inevitably different to mine. And that was probably one of the reasons why we kind of didn't work out, where I'm probably more, I like us to sit down at the table and eat dinner together and talk rather than watch TV perhaps, or I kind of insist that the girls maybe tidy their room more than once every 6 months and things like that, you know, whereas their mum might be a bit more free and easy and happy to just kind of let things slide and eat dinner on the couch and watch a movie or something. Those kinds of differences of rules are fine. We've never had a problem caused by that, and it was always my rationale was always, we're united on the things that really matter. So how you expect them to behave and how much effort you expect them to put into their schoolwork and all those kinds of things we were unified on. But when we moved to the nest, the curious effect was that because they weren't moving from one place to another, it was far harder for them to adapt to dad's set of rules one week and mum's set of rules the next week.
Yes.
And similarly for us, it wasn't just about expecting them to adapt, because as soon as I realised this, I could kind of see the confusion, where their mum might want them to just shove the things in the dishwasher and forget about it. I might want them to clear up after a meal and do something to earn their allowance, and it's just that kind of psychological shift that was enabled by having two separate places is no longer there. So I think that's a really good example of how we've all had to just kind of compromise and think of this as a completely new way of living. That was a challenge to overcome, I have to say, and it was probably more of a challenge for me to overcome than anyone else, being the one who likes things a bit more neat and tidy, But that's just me.
Oh, goodness. I another thing we have in common, that is just like me. That would definitely be a challenge for me. It's so intriguing. So I feel like there should be a documentary on this, just to really open, especially people that are going through this and other parents, as, hey, this is an option. Do you feel like this is that, this is a good solution for anyone going through divorce, or is it not for everyone?
I don't think it is for everyone, no. And I mean, it's interesting you raised the idea of documentaries and that. I have had a couple of production companies in the UK kind of have found me via similar means as maybe you did and asked about, the prospect of doing that. I think one of them was keen on doing it as a kind of living experiment, setting it out for a period of time and seeing how it worked. But obviously there's a lot of concerns there if you're, people who are going through divorce might not be completely, wanting that element of challenge in their lives. So right. I can see how it's difficult to make it happen. But in terms of whether it would work for everyone, I think when I started doing some reading into bird nesting, I think one of the things that I really encountered was, rather than people doing it after, it was over probably nearly 10 years from when we'd divorced, when we started bird nesting. Whereas I think a lot of people recommend that it's a good means of transitioning out of a marriage. So when you're in the process of parting and the kids are still getting used to the idea, it could be a means of easing that parting by, staying in the family home and the parents alternating who lives there. But for my part, I would imagine I could foresee that being a little bit more confusing, where you don't have that kind of clean break and everyone is kind of just kind of crumbling away around you. Mm-hmm. So I don't know personally whether I think that would have worked well for us. I suspect for us it probably wouldn't have done. The other aspect to it as well, obviously, you know, I have remarried and we have our blended family, and people have often asked, do I think it would have worked had me and my wife wanted to have another child together? Now that, you know, fortunately for us was never on the agenda, you know, at 43, but we're both 43 now. And I don't think either of us really wanted any more, particularly with 4 kids over sort of an 8-year gap. That wasn't a factor. But I think had we brought another child into the marriage, it would have been far more difficult to kind of contemplate shifting in and out of the house and bringing a child with you.
Yes.
Because inevitably I wouldn't have wanted to be apart from my wife and a baby, and bringing the 2 stepkids along as well. I could just foresee it becoming a little bit of a step too far in trying to accommodate everyone.
Exactly.
So I do think that it probably does have a bit of a sweet spot in terms of its applicability. I don't think it's probably much more complex than just having the two parents who are willing to give it a go and make it work, you know. And I also think with all of these ideas, you know, whether it's equal co-parenting or bird nesting, sometimes you can just take some of the best bits of it and the best principles and apply those, and you're still going to be streets ahead of where you were if you were just staunchly sticking to a traditional divorced family structure, you know.
What's fascinating to me, and I think will be intriguing to some listeners, is we've even had some listeners that have been contemplating divorce, where they're waiting until their kids are 18 because they don't want to disrupt anything, but they're very unhappy. And so when I hear this, I go, well, you know, because the primary concern is the children, and you're living together just to live together for the kids. And I wonder to myself, gosh, this is something to just to entertain and give some thought. If you are that unhappy, could you be happier, have your children see you happier, but maintain a nest situation? It's not so disruptive to their lives, and they're still getting both of you in their home. So it's just, the family that, and this was actually years ago, I want to say over 10 years ago, the family that I was telling you that I knew had done this, what they ended up doing is each getting apartments themselves, and they kept the children in the house that they had always been in. They would go and they would switch off week on, week off. And I just thought, wow, oh my goodness, this is like radical, you know. I've never heard of it before.
And it was 10 years ago, I'm sure. It was
and I mean, it's
blazing
still,
the trail.
Yeah, and it's still, you know, I think it's still something that people are like, oh my goodness. And like you said, there's definitely more of a financial commitment there, but there's ways, like you can design it. You can definitely work together to create that ideal situation. And as long as you've got, like you did with the kids in mind, you know, kids as the priority in their experience, which is so wonderful. And I'm sure they're so, I don't know if they're expressing it yet, and maybe your oldest has already, but I'm sure that they, as they get older, will really recognize and appreciate all that, you know, you guys have done in the interest of them.
I'm sure you're right there, and I appreciate the kind feedback. It's very kind of you. And I mean, it's fundamentally, actually, my eldest daughter, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. She expressed to me not so long ago that she actually really loves the fact, she was trying to describe the situation to her German housemates in the Netherlands. So I think the cultural barriers all come up. But she was trying to explain how her family situation works, and she said she just realised how much she loves that she's got, you know, effectively two mums and 2 dads, and that we all kind of get on and we don't bicker, and, you know, there isn't all the kind of hardship and challenge. And, you know, it's not to say, I don't want to be too Pollyanna-ish about it. It's not to say everyone's perfect and everyone's happy with all the time, but, you know, it just goes to show, I think, that you can make things work, and things can be better than you kind of at first anticipate they will be, I think, when you're going into divorce. But there's always a way. I think that's the key thing with anything.
Yes, absolutely. I think it really proves too that something so unconventional, you know, we look at the word conventional thinking that means security, but really going a lot of times outside of the box and being unconventional creates more security. And I think that's just a great thing. It's a beautiful thing.
Sure it is. Thank you.
I'm just so grateful that I got to speak with you and to share this concept and this parenting model that I, you know, definitely was, you know, I was just so excited to talk to you about it. And I want to provide a link to everything that you do. You write a ton, your community. I know that on Amazon, if we look you up, and we'll have links to that. If we look up your name, we'll find the books that you've written. But where else can we find more information?
The places to find me would be on Twitter. I'm Toby Hazlewood, all one word. And the online group predominantly on Facebook, I guess, it's facebook.com, and it's /divorced lifestyle designer. And then everything kind of hangs off divorcedlifestyledesign.com as well. So those are probably the best places to reach out to me. And I think on all of those places, you can probably find an email address. And I'm always happy to hear from people direct and help where I can. Like I say, it's a passion project rather than a business. And if you're interested in my writing on other bits and pieces as well, then that's probably fairly easy to find on Twitter as well. So it all kind of stems from the same place, really. I've learned and grown to value so much learning from other people, and conversations like we're having today, Summer, and other people who I've met through this, that it enriches my life so much that I'm kind of just pleased if I have the opportunity to try and help other people as well and share my own experiences.
Oh, I love it. I'm so grateful for it. Thank you so much. And we'll make sure we will have a cheat sheet with all of your information, the really great takeaways that we've talked about on the show, and links that you just mentioned. So it'll be quite easy for all of you to find everything that they need. Thank you so, so much, Toby.
Thank you.
Hey guys, thanks so much for listening to our podcast. You know what they say, if you can't find what you're looking for, then you need to create it. So that's what we did.
Yep, I scoured the internet and looked for the tribe that spoke to me, and I just couldn't find the community that was raw, vulnerable, and really wanting to make a change to the millions of families like ours. So I decided to create it. It took about one conversation for my husband to say, I'm in, and here we are.
But it takes listeners like you to keep it alive.
So please, if you like this, write a review, take a screenshot, share it on your social media. Tell people, it means the world to us.
Remember to email us. We would love to hear from you.
And please share this with someone you love.
And be bold enough to share it with someone that you don't.